Jim Robin, and I'm a physicist. I do research, well, in a whole number of areas, but basically just a general physicist. Well, I think the most unique thing I found in looking over all the tapes was 4 events that were represented little streaks of light, and they had some very unique character about them. In each case, they had basically the same shape and the same general character of path, sort of well, they were long and thin, sometimes with a tail, and a swooping type of a path. And when we took each of the 4 events and did a quick calculation of the speed, that in some events they were as high as about 30 miles an hour. And what was, I think, most unique about these particular 4 events was that there was no shadow associated with the streaks of light. In each of the cases, Barry had a very bright light on the camera, and the people that were in the foreground projected a very significant shadow in the background. And each of these events, there was no indication of any shadow, which is quite surprising. And the character of the lights looked like they had to be self-illuminating, at least to me. One of the events, the light started at one end of the screen or field of view and swooped all the way across the field of view to the other end. 2 of the other events, the lights streaked in the background. There was a doorway, and it was actually behind the doorway, and you can see it entering when it got into the field of view, when it came by the door opening, and then left the field of view in the back of the door, like a hallway. And then the other one, which was very unique, one of the people in the foreground, if you looked where his shoulder was, the light must have originated behind the person and then streaked over his shoulder and out of the field of view. And in each these 4 cases, the character of the light was basically the same, and the kind of trajectory it followed was the same. And in each case, there was no indication of any kind of a background shadow associated with the lights, and I found that quite unique. And to have them move as fast as about 30 miles an hour, which basically was anywhere from 4 to 8 frames for the whole event, when we looked at the frame by frame, was extremely fast. And no one actually perceived these until we looked at them on a monitor, which was very unique. You would think something that goes that fast would make some kind of a noise, something that would catch somebody's attention, but it did not. So I thought that was very unique. Well, what's unique and hard to explain, I think, is if it didn't cast a shadow, because everything that was in the foreground cast a very distinct shadow in the background. If this light had any kind of, even if it was just a cloud that had some kind of opaque nature to it, it would have cast some level of shadow. That, I think, is very unique, and it's hard for me to explain why it doesn't cast a shadow. And the fact that it looks like it's self-illuminating as opposed to reflected light would indicate normally something that's like a plasma or something that's fluorescent, and usually you would hear something like that. In other words, a crackling sound, something. So there's some features that don't quite live up to normal explanation, at least at the top level, you know, looking at the films that we saw. It's definitely not insects, that's for sure. If it's a hoax, I can't quite think of how they would carry that out, because if it was some kind of a reflection in the light or in the optics, usually you end up with multiple images, and reflections have very unique character. These didn't show any of that character, and also in some frames it was actually went from one end of the screen to the other. In others, it actually started being observable as soon as it came out of the doorway, and then went out of view when it went behind the doorway, as opposed to just arbitrarily moving somewhere across the screen. So they're very unique, I think. One of the difficulties in the scientific community in terms of trying to understand these kinds of phenomena, and I'm not saying I know really what the origin of the lights are, but in trying to investigate these types of phenomena, many times you can't take the normal methods of scientific investigation that are very specific, do laboratory experiments, measure various things. You just can't do that with some of these phenomena. And as a consequence, traditional scientific community has a lot of difficulty in even trying to explore phenomena that aren't something that they can touch and pet and measure. And these type of things here, I think, are in that category. So the best you can do from the scientific standpoint, I think, is sort of in a qualitative nature, make judgment calls and at least rule out what you think it can or cannot be, and that's about the best you can do. And you just can't categorically pinpoint that it's this or it's that. But from my observations, though, I don't think you can say that these 4 events that show these streaks of light can be fully explained, as far as I could tell. Well, there's a consistency there too. When you hear her description of what was going on when she was taking them, you look at the pictures, and those two also do not show shadows as if they were illuminated by the flash bulb. And they show the same general character, so they're probably part of the same phenomena. Now what I particularly saw in the videotapes, these were moving at very high speeds. It's hard for me to see from the photographs or correlate its motion, for example, but the general character looks like there's a correlation between what she took with the still photographs and what we saw on videotape.
What's going to happen next? What's it going to do to me?
There's definitely something up in the attic.
I told you, get down! Get down!
I ended up with a rope around my neck.
It definitely doesn't want us to be here.
It has all the makings of a Hollywood movie and will probably end up as one. Only those involved claim this is a real ghost story, and they say they've got the proof. What we're going to show you is an actual videotape of a haunting right here in Los Angeles County, made by a group of noted, well-known paranormal investigators. Now keep in mind, this footage has never before been seen anywhere publicly until now. As a matter of fact, they tried to keep it under wraps for the past 2 years until their investigation was complete. Since 1989, TV cameraman Barry Conrad has been hounding a haunting, and he says he's captured some ghostly goings-on on camera.
I've covered news, fires, floods, you name it. But what I saw in San Pedro, I never probably ever forget.
This story begins in the fall of 1988 when an estranged housewife, Jackie Hernandez, moved into this house in San Pedro, California, and some unusual things started to happen.
There was balls, my son's toys, flying across the room. Books were flying across the room. I was scared.
After hearing unexplained footsteps and voices coming from her attic, pictures being moved from walls, and capturing what she describes as strange balls of light with her camera as they would flash through her apartment, a friend convinced her to take her story to Barry Taff, a respected paranormal researcher credited as the chief investigator of the famous Entity case, which was made into a movie.
Out of more than 2,300 cases that I personally investigated in the last 24 years, we were able to actually record phenomena and document it in real time on videotape.
Taff and Conrad spent literally months with Hernandez in her hellish home with fingers crossed, waiting for something to happen before their video cameras. On September 4th, 1989, they say it did.
Ah! I'm not staying here, Barry. I'm out of here. I gotta get out of here. I can't stay here.
We're coming right now.
Okay, hurry, please. I don't know how long I can stay here.
We're leaving right now.
When the team arrived, Jeff Wheatcraft, an outspoken skeptical sound man, volunteered to prove everyone crazy and climb into the attic with a photographer to investigate a strange noise. Then, moments later...
What's wrong?
What happened?
I told you, get down! Get down!
I don't remember the point that I was picked up, but as it turns out, I ended up with a rope around my neck. All of a sudden, I feel this thing around my neck, and it's got me hanging, and it's pulling on my leg. Gary took a photo at that point because I remember the flash. The next thing I remember is I wanted to get the hell out of there.
There's been less than a handful of people that have been deliberately harmed or injured in some way by this phenomena. In fact, only one really well-established case, so this might be the second one, and if it was not for one of our other associates present in the attic, Jeff might have been killed.
But there's more. Later that night, eerie beams of light started showing up on the videotape. Then, in the days to follow, all around the house.
This was like a three-balled object, and it's not an insect. I've never seen an insect that looked like that.
Are they restless spirits, or reflections, or maybe just a technical glitch? Well, we asked an aerospace physicist to take a good long look at these tapes to try to find out what's going on.
I don't believe they're insects at all because they emit their own light. I would draw a conclusion that it's probably a better than 50-50 chance that this is something that we can't explain.
Now, for what it's worth, I'm not saying that I believe all this stuff or not, but I can say that I've known Barry, he's the guy with the camera, for the past 12 years or so. As a matter of fact, he and I used to work news together back in Ohio. And although I've always found him to be a bit overzealous in his work, I've never known him to lie. To tell you the truth, I'm not sure what to believe.
All I can tell you is that there was something there that defied rational explanation from my standpoint.
Now, if you've been spooked by what you've seen so far, get a load of this.
There it is.
There it is, right there.
Unbelievable.
One night, amidst an abundance of psychic activity, the investigators say they captured a liquid substance, a slime, if you will, actually dripping from the house's walls.
We took some samples back for analysis. It was given to a chemist, and it was human blood plasma with a heavy iodine content. This sounds like a bad movie. It sounds like a bad novel, but this was anything but, and it occurred repeatedly. It wasn't just one occasion.
Eventually, Hernandez moved out of the house, but claims the ghost, or whatever it was, followed her. Though today the disturbances have all but stopped, and she refuses to talk about her experience. Meantime, Conrad believes he's sitting on a wealth of information and is looking for a way to bring the images he's allegedly captured to the world. That is, if the world is ready.
Through the videotape medium, we actually captured some phenomena for once that I believe is something that scientists should take a little harder look at.
What I'm going to be talking about most of all is going to be what these streaks of light tell me. He's got
What do they tell you?
He's got a whole bunch of maybe 24 that I think I've seen over about the 9-month period that I looked at all these. And of everything I saw, that's the one phenomena that, in my opinion, can't be explained by me. And that's what I think I'm going to talk about tonight. See, now,
Okay.
see this right here? Do you see it?
Yeah.
Now watch it. This must be a zoom. It comes around. See it? Now it gets lost around here, but
Hold on a second.
it keeps the... What?
Pause.
Okay, look at it again. See as it comes around?
What is that?
That's, to me, I don't know exactly what it is, but I know what it isn't. And I don't think it's just a fluke, because he's got too many of them. And these things, they occur indoors, they occur outdoors, they occur in the daytime. He's got night shots. They respect foreground, and I saw shots when they were in the background, and they respect boundaries. Now you notice, first of all, one of the things I noticed almost consistently throughout all of them, it's bright, and when you take a look at all of the shots, these things generate their own light. You can tell it's not like something that's just a reflected light like a bug, because it wouldn't look this way, because this is in the shade of the house. If you get a good shot at the house, see it's shade. And you wouldn't see it bright like that unless it was generating its own light. And somewhere it's going to reappear. There it is, right down there, and it goes into the ground. There it goes.
In a nutshell, Doctor, you examine the tapes. What do you think about these flashes?
Well, the most, I guess, impressive thing that I saw in all of Barry's tapes that I saw was this phenomena of these streaks of light. And basically taking all of them into account, and I saw maybe 2 dozen or 3 dozen events over maybe 6 hours worth of tapes, is that there's no real logical explanation for them. They have too much of a unusual phenomena. So the one thing I know for sure, I can't tell you what they are.
Could they be, just mistakes in the tape, bad tape, something like that?
I don't believe they're flaws, for example, in the camera or the film, because over the 9 months and the 6 or 7 hours worth of tapes that I saw of Barry's, he took them with 2 different cameras. He purchased a new camera about halfway through his investigation. So it's certainly not a phenomena within the camera. He took about, well, I saw about 6 or 7 different rolls, so there's no flaw in the film. And I looked at the character of the lights. They had, some of them were in the foreground, some of them were in the background, and I noticed when they were in the background, they respected boundaries. When they went behind something, they literally went behind and emerged back out again.
Could they be insects?
I don't believe they're insects at all, because again, when I looked at all of the events, I'm convinced that they emit their own light, number one. They all have a very smooth flight path. Bugs, insects are very jerky in their motion. These were all very well-defined paths.
When we enhanced them electronically, blew them up, what did they show you?
Barry and I looked at some of these in slow motion and in zoom, and that even convinced me more that these were phenomena that I didn't know what they were, because when we looked at them in slow motion, and we can clock them, we counted the frames and roughly how far they went, some of the events looked like they were about 30 to 40 miles per hour. They took maybe 3 or 4 frames, and they would traverse literally the width of the room. And also, again, like the very smooth paths. Bugs do not do that. They don't go that fast, and they don't have smooth paths. Also, the events occurred indoors, outdoors, in the daytime, in the nighttime, and they all had basic characteristics that were common. And I didn't just look at 1 or 2. When I looked at them all and made a total assessment, my final conclusion was that there's no way that I could explain those occurrences.
So they're not of this world? Or?
It's hard to say. What I believe I can say is taking all the films into consideration and maintaining an open mind, that there is the strong possibility that this could be some kind of an apparition. There's no way I could tell absolutely. But I would draw a conclusion that it's probably a better than 50-50 chance that this is something that we can't explain.
The flash of light, the one that passed through her in front of her face and they slowed it up, it's got like 3 little spears to it.
A few of the events, the streaks of light had very unique structure, like 3 elements to them. And there was 3 or 4 events where this kind of structure was present. And I thought that was very interesting because, again, it just didn't manifest itself in something that was easily explained. There was also another occurrence where Jackie was sitting in a room in full daylight illumination, and we saw something that was a little bit unique from most of the events. There was more than one that was kind of like sparkling around her head, and I thought that was very, very unusual. That was one atypical event, because usually we saw one at a time, but this was a few. And again, when I looked at them, they were self-emanating. They were lights that generated their own, or items that generated their own light.
And Doctor, your expert opinion about this?
Well, I think a final conclusion is, I personally, looking at them, cannot explain where they come from, what they are. Considering the whole situation that Barry is investigating, the possibility that they could be an apparition, I think is very strong.